everyone. Welcome to the Oral History 101 workshop brought to you by DSU's Library Special Collections and Archives. So for today's workshop, we are online and we are recording. So if you have to leave early or if someone was unable to make it, we will be providing this later. So we're going to go ahead and get started. While we're doing the workshop, feel free to put questions in the chat, but then at the end, you may be able to unmute yourself and ask questions as well. So I'm Brittany Newberry, Music and Popular Culture Collection Archivist, and I'm here with Laurel, who will introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Laurel. I'm the University Archivist here at Georgia State.
Okay, so Laurel's going to take it over and tell us all about what oral history is.
All right, we're glad you joined with us today, everyone. Oral history is a type of history that's jointly created by the interviewer and the person being interviewed. You can make discoveries that weren't previously known from the written record, as we did when talking with George Manners, who was the longtime dean of the business school during GSU's early formative years. Let's listen to what he has to say.
One of the key issues that confronted Georgia State at this period that we're talking about, 1957 to 69, was the issue of integration. And could you describe some of the key events that led up to integration and talk about things like how the faculty and administrators reacted to the coming of it and how well they planned for it and so on and so forth?
Yes, the key to understanding all of our reactions and attitudes is in the legislation of the state of Georgia. That is, if one black came into a school which was designated as being for whites, state money would be removed and the school would be closed. I talked with Chancellor Caldwell about that. Chancellor, when the rub comes and the courts order us to take a black, what will happen to you? He said, Mr. Manners, I don't know anything other than just shut you down. Now that was a chancellor speaking. And the Board of Regents felt the same way. So our reaction is just based not on our feelings regarding the blacks. It was, what do we have to do to keep the institution viable?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's oral history? I like this Donald Ritchie definition, and let's take a look at it more closely. He says that oral history collects memories and commentaries. In other words, oral history is very egalitarian. Everybody can do it, and those whose experiences who have been overlooked are also important. He also talks about historical significance. In other words, history from the bottom up can be as important as history from the top down. Social history, as well as traditional history of the important leaders of the day, is important here. Recorded interviews. There are many different types of records, not just those that are written down. A record needs to document something and be in a fixed format that can be referred to later. So he also talks about being well prepared. And that's because a record is deliberately and carefully created. And he also talks about audio or video format. So oral history is not, to start out with at least a written record, but it's a record that can be heard and seen. So why do oral history? I think there are about 5 reasons, and I'll go through them fairly quickly so that we can figure this out. First, to enlarge the historical record. A lot of the historical record is written text. It's documents that confirm transactions, could be correspondence, diaries, emails, all those sorts of things. The value is that this is evidence of agreements, facts, and events that's created and kept permanently as memories fade. But other kinds of records like photos, artifacts, and even memories provide other ways to understand what happened. Then second, oral history fills in historical gaps and silences with the voices and perspective of those who are underrepresented or maybe not even represented at all in the historical record. The downside of written records is that those folks who create them, those that are in power, and those with enough resources to create and preserve them have the most influence in determining what the historical story tells. And third, to understand the significance and meaning of what happened and why it happened. Because an event will look different to a bystander than it would to an active participant or a protester on the streets. So why do oral history? To understand how past experiences and the memory of them affects the present. That's one reason. What we choose to remember and what meaning we attribute to our experiences, and also what trauma does to people's memories. All of that affects how we act in the present. And then finally, to preserve the voice, personality, and presence of the storyteller. A narrator's inflection and tone of voice, as well as their level of physical comfort, conveys additional levels of meaning to their experience. So oral history is essentially a whole body, heart and soul experience. So I'm going to play you another clip it here from an oral history. This was called GSU Old Timers Reminisce, and it was an event where GSU people presented recollections of their early years at GSU. Dean Manners, the person you heard earlier, he coordinated it, and it's somewhat like an oral history, a public oral history, rather than a one-on-one, which is what we usually do. And again, from this reminiscence, we learn things that weren't in the written record. So listen to faculty member Paul Blunt talk about his time as a student working on the Student Signal newspaper.
But once Doc Sparks took over after that, we began building the foundation of the institution, much of which you recognize today. The Signal was created. It was brand new. I had the happy privilege of being on the original staff. I wrote a few columns every now and then, but they wanted me to go out and get ads. If you want to know how thin the finances were, one of my, let's call them clients, were the movie houses. So I would tour the Fox and the Georgian, all the theaters. They'd give me all the advertising, and their payment was in passes. I'd sell the passes to the students, turn the money to the Treasury, and we ran the Signal that way for a long time. I recall with great affection one great Atlanta firm that's now a Canadian organization, and that's Riches. They were always good in a very gracious way of giving the finest ads we probably had in that period of time. And so the Signal was one.
Okay. So this is the 1930s, and a lot of people didn't have real money that they could spend, and so what you're hearing is a barter system by which the Signal was run, which I thought was pretty fascinating. And to bring us back to the first slide with the snippet of the George Manners oral history. After his oral history with our department, Manners took a good amount of time to write his reminiscences. The oral history is the size of a loose leaf notebook, but his reminiscences is 2 to 3 times that length. Both of those formats are valuable, but the reminiscences include additional material that he remembered and also could verify than in that more reflective written work. So again, we learned a lot that we had not known using both. And then to kind of wrap things up here, I just wanted you to be familiar with Cliff Kuhn. I kind of call him the Dean of Oral History at GSU. He was a faculty member in both the history department and our own special collections and archives department. He died in 2015, but you will still see him listed on the College of Arts and Sciences website. He was the first full-time executive director of the Oral History Association, and he brought the Oral History Association to GSU. He also really liked the democratic nature of oral history. It puts the stories of people who had been marginalized into real history, like stories of the workers who went on strike at the Atlanta's Fulton Bag and Cotton Mills Company. And Cliff also took history to the public through his Living Atlanta project on the radio, and also with his walking tours regarding the 1906 race riot in Atlanta. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Brittany, who will tell you more about what you need to know.
Hello again, everyone. So now we're going to talk about who's involved in oral history interviews. There are several parts to an oral history interview, and the two main ones are your interviewer and then your narrator / interviewee. So the interviewer is the person conducting the interview. This person is generally trained, usually through taking workshops like these and learning about how to be comfortable doing an interview. They also have familiarity with the person, topic, or some historical context. So you don't want to be conducting an interview about a time period or place that you are unaware of, because then you're not able to ask follow-up questions outside of the general questions you've already created. So you want to have some knowledge of the topic and what you're discussing as the interviewer. So next is the narrator or the interviewee. This is the person being interviewed. The person being interviewed during an oral history recording. While there are many possible terms, including interviewee or chronicler, this iteration of core principles and practices from Oral History Association calls them the narrator exclusively. So they do that to acknowledge that the people we interview have agency and not merely living human subjects. So you're always going to want to interview someone who is knowledgeable about the topic. You don't want to interview someone about Jim Crow South who was not born or living during that time, because they will have no knowledge of it. So you want to be aware when you're choosing someone to interview that they are knowledgeable. And usually if you're doing it for a class assignment or for a community project, the person leading that project will have knowledge of people they want to be interviewed and will help identify potential narrators for the project. So after you've decided who you're going to interview, you want to think about the interview itself. And all of this that we're talking about now will be discussed in later workshops more in depth. This is just giving you a general overview of things to consider when doing oral history interviews. So, 1 second. You want to think about the location of the interview. We like to have them in quiet locations where you'll be undisturbed. You can do them online, but you need both you and the narrator need to be in quiet places, not around ACs, loud noises, no pets in the room, that kind of thing. You want to make sure to test equipment and make sure it works, and that you have 2 recorders going so that you have a backup. And you always want to make sure that your interviewee is comfortable. A lot of topics that you discuss during an interview can be sensitive and traumatic. So your narrator may be uncomfortable and there may be tears and sadness and that kind of thing. And you want to be aware of that going in. So you want to be ready for difficult or traumatic topics. It's emotional work, but the interviewer's role is to acknowledge without intervening in the story or pulling the focus away from the narrator. Expect that the success and quality will vary when it comes to doing an interview, and you can't always control everything. You want to come prepared with questions. Always have sample questions that you want answered or plan to have answered during the interview. Some may not get answered. Some may be answered without you asking them. And always listen and ask follow-up questions. And be patient and silent. After asking questions, you want to give the narrator time to respond to questions before follow-up. So after the interview, this is next steps. You want to make sure you have completed forms. And like I've said, you're going to get more in depth in later workshops about this. Those forms usually include a release form, which is an agreement to share the interview, and you want to have some biographical data about the narrator. You always want to send a thank you note. I stress this heavily. Mail thank you notes, snail mail is always nice, but you can also do an email, just thanking them for their time and to show your appreciation for their willingness to participate in the project. And you want to also send them a copy of the interview. And you want to make multiple copies of the recording in different locations, like on a flash drive, external hard drive, your computer, or in the cloud, like Google Drive or out of cloud. And we always recommend 2 copies, but more is always better. These copies will help you to not lose the recording if anything happens to the original device it was recorded on. Let's talk about the challenges and limitations of oral history interviews. So oral history is celebrated by its practitioners for being the narratives of people and communities typically absent in the archives, and it brings them into the conversation. However, as these histories expand to include the sheer breadth of human experiences, certain limitations begin to arise that challenge the oral history model and present historians with obstacles to overcome. Sensitivity is one such issue that many interviewers struggle with, especially when it comes to topics that are themselves very sensitive. Trying to maintain a substantial emotional and professional distance from a subject can be difficult when talking about experiences like hate crime, segregation, or genocide. Presenting the story as it is told, as it was remembered by the person being interviewed, is the basic goal of an oral history. And any intentional or unintentional spins put on it by the interviewer very quickly devalue it. Another issue presented by oral histories are their accessibility to the public. A 40-page interview transcript is often unappealing to the everyday patron, and even audio files can be overwhelming if they are not segmented into identifiable chunks. So poorly presented oral histories run the risk of being overlooked by readers if they appear too long to read. That said, making oral history shorter would simply flip the problem on its head, as dedicated researchers would be left craving more of the story. And then there's a nature of bias within oral histories. They are the narrator's memories of a certain event, topic, time period, and cannot be as reliable as written documentation and other sources of information. So those are just a few of the challenges and limitations that you need to consider when conducting oral history interviews. Whenever you do oral history interviews, you want to consider them as supplemental sources for your research that go along with other secondary and primary sources that you use. They can't be the only source of evidence for your research. And we stress this highly in the archives. We also stress using both the recording and the transcript to make sure you're getting the full picture of that, and then using collections that we may also have on that person here or other archives. so that you can get more information about the person, the event, the topic. Yeah, and so that's all that we have. But I wanted to mention some upcoming workshops that we have coming up, and then we wanted to take time for your questions and to answer anything that you have about what we talked about or any of the workshops coming up. So on the screen are the workshops that we have coming up. Next one is next week on February 8th, and they all are online and will be recorded and made available later. So yeah, I'll leave the screen up, but feel free to put questions in the chat or unmute and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. I know you offered it last semester, but I was one of the ones who emailed and couldn't make it, and so I'm very happy that you're doing this, so thank you. I had a question about, you mentioned completed forms after the interview. Are you going to talk about what kind of forms you're talking about, or is this kind of forms that you develop based on the research that you're doing and the interviews you're giving, or is this some kind of like typical template forms or something like that?
Oh yeah, so we will be talking about forms in another workshop, but it's generally we ask, it's ethical and legal to have like release agreements that the interviewer and the narrator sign, giving you the ability to make it accessible online, and we'll give you guys examples of those in one of the later workshops. I believe it's policies and ethics, or if not that, how to plan for an oral history project.
Great, very helpful, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Maria Paula. I had a similar question about the release forms. I started kind of investigating I don't want to say a family mystery because that sounds really dramatic, but just like some things in our family history that a lot of people like me and my parents started getting really interested in. And so I've been interviewing some of the older members of my family, and it wasn't until a little bit into the kind of like interviewing and I've been recording them that I realized I was kind of doing oral history research, like, and then I realized that there's all these like, you know, ethics involved, and I've never had them sign a release form or anything like that. So I was wondering like how to kind of go back and ask for their permission, and like would I have to maybe provide a transcript for them so they can remember what they're like signing the release for, if that makes sense, or any recommendations for that?
So this is with family members,
Yes.
and are you planning to share them anywhere?
Possibly.
Oh, that is a sticky situation. You may want to attend our February 15th workshop to get more information on that.
Okay.
Because ethically and probably legally, it's not good to share those publicly without a release agreement. And generally people sign those after the interview is completed, but usually on the same day. You may be able to provide them with transcripts and do a release agreement, allowing them to agree to it and let them hear the interview and have them sign an agreement for that specific one. That might be
Okay.
something. I've never had to deal with that situation personally.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but definitely attend that workshop. People leading that are more knowledgeable. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I had a brief question, which we might be talking about in future conversations. But are you all going to kind of discuss? I'm doing an oral history right now for my dissertation, And are you all going to discuss like getting the participants or barriers to getting people to want to participate in an oral history?
Yeah, so we definitely are and are how to plan for an oral history project, because that is one of the problems. And it's always great to either go through people you know in the community or through faculty members or other people you're aware of who are connected with who you're trying to interview. Yeah. But
Okay.
we'll definitely like discuss that further, because that's the largest part of doing this, is like finding people to participate.
Yes.
And it really depends on your topic. If it's something people are interested in, you're going to get more people who want to do it. But if it's something that could be triggering or harmful for an individual to talk about, that can cause people not to want to participate. But they
Okay.
do, we generally, when you're doing release agreements, they do have the ability to say, no, you can only use this for your assignment and nothing else. And they can have their personal information redacted. So our example agreement includes that, where they can have anything about them redacted that isn't just the content or the topic itself.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing it. Yeah, I went through IRB, so I'm just trying to actually get people to participate. So yeah,
and
that's why I was curious. So thank you.
usually you don't have to do IRB for oral history interviews because there's scholarship.
Yes, but because of my topic, I'm talking about the experiences of Black women teachers during COVID.
Oh,
I just wanted to cover them, cover myself, cover everybody. Yes.
is this secondary or higher ed?
Yes, higher ed.
Okay, cool. Well, we wish you luck.
Yeah. And so I've just been recruiting. If you know any teachers also in K through 12, I would like to talk to them too. So yeah, just throwing it out there.
Yeah, sometimes the word spreads through,
Word of
not
mouth,
oral
yeah.
history, but word of mouth, yes.
Thank you. Yes, indeed.
Any other questions or comments? Well, if not, we're not going to keep you here forever. Feel free to attend our next workshop happening on February 8th, which is research in oral history. It's all about using oral histories for your research, not necessarily recording them, but using ones that are already in the archives and in databases and that sort of thing. So please attend that and the other ones going forward. And be on the lookout for this recording. We appreciate all you attending, and we hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.